Well, that ability to transform is a distinction between two things. He says it's a distinction between what's known as potentiality and the second one being actuality. So Aristotle says it's a distinction between two things, potentiality and actuality. Okay, we need to think about something being classified in Aristotelian terms as potential. What does it mean to say that something is classified as inherently potential? If something is potential, if it has potential, and you can think about it yourself, let's say you're aspiring to complete your education and get a degree, right? You are sort of in the potential phase of your life, if you want to think of it in this sense, right? You're working towards a certain goal, you have a certain end in mind, you have something that you're attempting to accomplish, and the desire, the potential within you is what's motivating you and propelling you forward to accomplish that thing. Once that thing has been accomplished, right, once your goal, once your intent, once your idea has been accomplished, it's no longer potential, it's been transformed now, right? The form of what you're doing or the form of the thing that we're analyzing or discussing has now been changed. That form has, according to Aristotle, been actualized, right? Whenever we're discussing actuality, once it's been completed, the potential has been completed, we say that the form has been actualized, right? So actualization of potential. So anytime we're talking about actuality, we're talking about the actualization of the potential. And basically all that means with respect to the example that I just gave, imagine that you are trying to get your degree, you study, you write your papers, you turn in your work, you get your degree. You're working towards that is the potential, you getting it is the actualization of that potential. Alright, now, we have to think a little bit deeper about this distinction between potentiality and actuality. Well, with respect to potentiality, the question then becomes, what is the inherent nature of something which has potential? What is the inherent nature of something which has potential? If something has potential, that means it's in the process of becoming, right? It is in the process of becoming. There's a distinction, and there's another distinction that I won't get into in this video, between Aristotle and Plato over the idea of what's known as becoming. And philosophers spend entirely way too much time discussing becoming, but it's something that we love to do, and it's actually very interesting. I'm not going to go into becoming now because, I mean, that would take forever. The idea of becoming, in a general sense, is the idea of an evolving, not in a Darwinian sense, the idea of an evolving, progressing transformation, right? The idea that something is evolving and transforming at every instance of every day, of every moment. There isn't a moment that goes by that we are not, human beings are not in the process of becoming, right? This potential is always there as long as we are alive, right? And if you think about that, if you think about potentiality in terms of becoming, or even deeper in terms of becomingness, right? Then you will recognize, and this goes to, quick tangent, the myth of Sisyphus, right? As long as you are alive, you've made a decision. You made a coherent decision today. And this sounds very vulgar, and I apologize for it, but it's true. This is how philosophers talk, right? The fact that you're alive, the fact that you are here today, is a direct consequence of you choosing not to kill yourself this morning, right? Because we all have that ability. We all have that potential to say, you know, today's my last day on earth. I don't want to be here. I'm going to take my own life. The fact that you've decided to stay here means there's something you're still working towards. It might be to not miss your episode of your favorite show, to play more video games, to change the world, to save the planet, whatever it might be. But there's a reason why you're still here. As long as you're still here, you still have a potential to become something different, to contribute to something new, to add something, to learn something, to take away from something, to harm someone. So this idea of becoming is inherent in human existence, right? This idea of becoming is inherent in human existence. This idea of becoming is inherent in human existence. Now there's a lot of discussion on becoming in inanimate existence, how does that look? And I'm not going to get into that right now, because in this discussion, we're trying to figure out which came first, the chicken or the egg. Okay, so we recognize that this idea of potentiality is synonymous with this idea of becoming, this idea of perpetual transformation. However, we recognize, well, if something is in the process of becoming, right, and this is important, and there's quite a bit that's written on this by ancient authors, right? If we're in the possibility of becoming, then in a sense, obviously we haven't actualized our potential, and therefore the idea of potentiality is itself inherently incomplete. Right? So that Aristotle says, when we discuss, when we talk about potentiality, we're looking at something, that which is incomplete, right? The notion that I am working on completing my education means that I haven't completed in my education. So with respect to my education is now incomplete, right? It hasn't been fulfilled. It hasn't been actualized. There's still potential for me to fulfill my education. After I've completed my education, then I can say it's complete now, right? It's been actualized. But while I'm in the process of becoming educated, then it is sort of stuck in this state of incompleteness, right? When we're talking about actuality, we realize that actuality is different from potentiality for one significant reason. We recognize that this idea of becoming, right? This idea of becoming has now been transformed, right? It's been translated into something different, right? It's been translated into being, right? So that we say that anytime we're talking about actuality, we're talking about being. And I've said this in my video on Plato, Plato's hierarchy or the form. The theory that describes notions of being is known as ontology, right? And it's the theory that talks about being, the existence of all of this, right? How does this maintained? Becoming transforms in a sense, right? And there's very few people that actually get into this depth, and I haven't seen a lot of contemporary philosophers discuss sort of being, becoming, because of many, many reasons. It's sort of dated, but I still am fascinated by the whole being, becoming distinction. But this idea of being translated and transformed into this concept of being, existence, isness, right, or to be, right? All of these ideas relate to the actualization of something, right? This thing wasn't yesterday, it is today. A clear, quick example. You can imagine that you go to the chapel to get married, right? So you go to the chapel, you're there with your significant other, the marriage vows are being recited, right? Do you take this person to be your blah, 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 so on and so forth, right? You're in the process now of becoming married. You're not married yet, but you're in the process. You've initiated the process of becoming married. You're not quite married yet, technically though, right? Because you're not quite married yet. You're not technically married until you make an affirmation, right? You have to sort of evoke the claim "I do," right? It's that evocation that gives you and sanctifies your marriage. Once you do that, once you say, "Do you marry so-and-so to be your so-and-so?" I do. What you've done now is you've actualized all of that potentiality, right? That becoming married is no longer the case. It would be wrong to say that you're in the process of becoming married. It is now that you are married, right? That your being, your existence is that I am married to X person, right? So that we've had a transition from becoming to being. We've had a transition from potentiality to actuality. Well, the last thing then is to look at the idea of completeness, right? Well, we would recognize that if we're talking about potentiality as being incomplete, actuality would have to be complete.